Yes, friends, on a Friday, back for more because, I don't know, we're just gluttons for punishment? No, we're gluttons for excitement now, as it is Adam Armbrecht and Andy Mackiewicz, OGP, the one giant podcast, breaking down another position of need, as the New York Giants only have all of those, taking a look at the draft class, taking a look at the undrafted free agency, and also what was currently on the roster for Big Blue heading into a big year. Andy, how are we, sir?
I'm good, Adam. Yesterday we did the rundown on the cornerback room, which
Yeah.
the joke normally is cornerbacks are just wide receivers who can't catch the football, right?
That's right. Yeah. So famously, we've got a lot of receivers on both sides of the ball in that regard. So the way we wanted to approach this was obviously we know there's a lot of curiosity around players and familiar names coming from last year and from the previous regime. We know that some fans are really excited about some undrafted free agents. We're going to tap into those. But the biggest one, the most important one, was the big move that Joe Schoen made in the draft. Obviously, the top of the second round, 2 tradebacks, first with the Jets, then with the Atlanta Falcons, and ultimately at 43, picked Wan'Dale Robinson, who Andy could not have been any more disgusted with.
I mean, look, I said before in the post draft situation that I would talk about my preferences of another player over Wan'Dale Robinson. I'm not even going to mention that player's name anymore because it doesn't even matter. He is not a
Not in
Giant.
Big Blue. That's right.
Wandale Robinson is. And also watching Wandale Robinson's drafting, I mean, that's one of the best parts about the draft is watching these guys like in their house with the people that were around them that loved them and supported them and seeing what it means to him. Like, I don't know if it was his brother or cousin or friend, but like he gets up and he gives a big hug to someone that clearly has been with him through like all of the trials and tribulations. And he starts breaking down in tears, being like, I finally made it. And man, that's got to make me excited. So that's why I'm removing everything else and saying he is a Giant, and I am excited that he is one.
By the way, this is a completely off script of when Evan Neal was drafted. Unlike, it's like the Thibodeau and the Joy and everyone, you said all these players are so happy and excited to be drafted. Evan Neal, he got the phone call. He was like, yep. And there's even the conversation with Joe Schoen where he was like, hey, remember what we talked about last week? He's like, yep. And he's like, what? He's like, we want you to do that when you get it. He goes, yep. Like he was just like, yes, yes, yes. And then they called his name. He stood up and goes, I'm a Giant. Like, and he was totally happy about it, but I love it from offensive linemen. Like that's the way it is when an offensive lineman gets drafted.
I was just going to say, it matters to me what position you play with how you react. Like,
Oh, yeah.
if you're an edge rusher or like a big skill, big time explosive play position, I want you to have that like bravado a little bit. I want you to have that cockiness, confidence. It's like when you're an offensive lineman, he's like, I'm here to do one job and one job only. You will never get to the quarterback. He's like a robot.
Yeah.
And like, I appreciated that. I want my offensive lineman to be cool, calm, and collected. And that's what Evan Neal gave me. I was like, man, I really like that guy. So listen, the reactions are, I agree. I grade differently based on position. I loved both Thibodeau and Evan Neal. It's like they're yin and yang. One's like the guy that walks tall, carries a big stick. The other one is like, I will scream from the rooftops, I'm the best player, and you're about to watch me do it.
That's fantastic. Yeah. So the spectrum exists there, but specifically on Wan'Dale Robinson, to your point, listen, we said it at the time of the draft. You had other names maybe on your mind. I had other names maybe at 67 that I was thinking about. And when the Giants traded back, you start to say, well, maybe the guys that I was looking at, as you say, they're not Giants, but I won't mention them here. You go, oh, is it too early to take one of them? The Giants end up going with a player that was 80th on the overall big board, at least by ESPN.com. And in the moment, I think there was a lot of question and curiosity. Now, because he wasn't on my list or in my, purview, I went over, read the measurables, looked better than a lot of the other guys that we were talking about high in the second round. And then you go and you watch the tape. And let's be very clear about this player. Some of the things they say are one of the knocks, and full credit to Justin Pennick, who brought this up over on Twitter yesterday, was this is a guy that you get the ball into the hands of behind the line of scrimmage. That's how you activate him, right? And the concern potentially could be with any receiver like this is he going to have enough room to get himself into his rhythm and into his groove? Listen, there's always going to be curiosities. But once he gets into his groove, this is a kid that he's not a lightning fast on tape, but he just seems to have, it's like watching a running back who shows patience, right? Who lines up blockers the right way, who seems to have great field vision. Wandale Robinson with the ball in his hands, second in all of college football with yards after the catch. He just seems to understand I can glide from hash mark to hash mark, in between, out of traffic, off of a handbar and arm tackles, despite my size and stature. The kid can get it done. Like, he is a weapon, plain and simple.
It's like when you talk about gliding and setting up blocks, it reminds me a little bit of Arian Foster when he played at running back for the Houston Texans, where it's like he's not going to blow you away with speed, but he's just so
Sure.
smart and he's shifty. Le'Veon Bell comes to mind in terms of him setting up blocks and being patient. I think that Wandale Robinson is a little bit more athletic than both of them
Yes.
in open space. But Adam, this is what we talked about when we did a quick recap of some of the draft picks. What I think you're seeing from Dable and Kafka is they want shifty guys that can make people miss in the open field.
Yeah.
Not necessarily like, while top line speed is important, it's not necessarily the be all end all. And you brought up a great point about getting him the ball behind the line of scrimmage. The Giants were one of the least motioning teams in the NFL on offense last year. Mike
Listen, when you
Kafka.
can't even walk up to the line and get a playoff, you're not going to try to motion people. All
Right,
right. Let's just
right. They're like, whoa, who are we kidding? That you think we're going to hand it off to this guy doing a jet sweep? Like, how many times could we do that with Evan Ingram for -4 yards? But with Dable's system and Kafka's system that he was in with Eric Bieniemy, they were two of the highest pre-motion snap teams in the NFL, giving all these exotic looks. And when you think about how tantalizing that could be, with Kadarius Toney running one way and Wandale Robinson running the other, and like you get that half moment where a linebacker freezes not knowing where the ball is, that opens up big holes for these guys that we know can make explosive plays.
Yeah, and to say nothing of the fact that he is a 92, 96, and 97% graded short, intermediate, and deep threat over on a lot of the scouting websites as well, and ran a 4.40. So to your point, like, listen, is he blazing fast speed? No, but guess what? Football quickness combined with a pretty darn good 40 time can certainly get you a long way down the road. So I listen. I think whether or not my in the moment excitement, right, gets me a little bit overhyped. But the more I watch him, it obviously makes a ton of sense for the New York Football Giants. You bring him into a room where you get to feel like you have a real weapon there. And Andy, as I said, this has been a lot of legwork for Andy, doing some research, pulling some really good quotes. How about this one when referencing what it's like to defend against Wan'Dale Robinson?
Oh
Not blowing
yeah,
smoke. He's just a quick and elite one of those guys in the slot you're not really going to be able to get your hands on right away.
and that is from the NFL draft. That is literally ripped from the headlines from players that have played against Wandale Robinson in the SEC. And Adam, do you know who said that quote?
Someone that might be in the Giants cornerback room right now.
Ah, yes, it is one Cordell Flott, who went just a few picks after Wandale Robinson. They are now teammates. But when they asked Cordell Flott, like, who was toughest to guard? And he's like, not blowing smoke. It's Wandale Robinson, because that guy is quick. And like, I couldn't get my hands on him. He went on to say a few other things though, right, Adam?
Yeah, well, and the other part was too, because I mentioned like some of the way we look at this receiver and how he grades out. He went on. Flott said you got to be able to create speed at the top of the route. He's a really good receiver. And the thing about top speed at the top of the route, right? Because we always talk about sometimes when you scout players, you go, well, he's got good short area quickness. He can beat his man off the line, but isn't going to get away from him after the fact. In Wandale Robinson, if you can create that separation for him because he's a smaller receiver, but if you can get him going, it's good night, right? If you can get Kadarius Toney and Wan'Dale Robinson running some routes here and using their speed and quickness and opening everything else underneath, now it comes down to, I'll give, you don't hear me make a lot of compliments toward Daniel Jones over the course of this offseason. Heck of a deep ball thrower. If you can protect him and give him time, you're talking about have multiple players that know how to blow the top off of defenses where they cannot be caught.
Yeah, and you think about not going into too much of the current roster, but most people think that he's kind of a very similar player to Kadarius Toney. I think Kadarius Toney's a little bit bigger. I think Kadarius Toney's just slightly a little bit stronger. And the way that Kadarius Toney runs routes is just tremendous. Like, well, I mean, how many times can you watch the Dallas Cowboys game and watch him juke out Trevon Diggs, like, and send him into a new stratosphere, right? Like, it's a different skill set. And, at first I was kind of like, well, why are the Giants picking this type of skill set? But this is exactly how you build a room to complement the type of offense you want to run.
Yeah, and not only that, man. So you said, which prospect did you like better? Who would you like to see them take? You know why they went ahead and still managed to pick up 2 extra picks? And we talked about those drafts and how those draft selections and what it meant for Big Blue to round out this roster. You also had to take a look inside the wide receiver room for the New York Football Giants. This isn't a secret for anybody. When you go over and you said Kadarius Toney, the human joystick, fantastic. Kenny Golladay, Sterling Shepard, Darius Slayton. Those are the other big names in the wide receiver room right now. We've already talked about multiple times in terms of clearing cap space, how Darius Slayton, 2.5 million, is certainly going to be on the potential chopping block here for Joe Shane. But then even Sterling Shepard, listen, it's great. He restructured. He gets to stay here. Everyone knows I love Sterling Shepard. I advocated for them keeping him on this roster. No guarantee that he's ready week 1. No guarantee that when he's ready in week 4 that he can still be any version of who he once was. He's over 30 now. And then Kenny Golladay. Like, here's a guy that we all think, again, brought in a player from Detroit who had an injury history. Wouldn't you know it? He had injuries. Now, last year, you saw some small sample sizes when he was out there and Kadarius Toney was on the field too, how it started to open some things back up. But what is Kenny Golladay at this point of his career? Is he a low end number 1? Is he a high end number 2? Is he a mid number 2? Like, we don't know what Kenny Golladay really is at this point of his career. We think he can benefit from a Kadarius Toney and from a Wandale Robinson, but this is the level of uncertainty in that wide receiver room is why you need to take a player like Robinson pretty high in the draft, and why in a minute we'll get into some of the flyers that they're looking to take in the undrafted free agency class.
Yeah, keep in mind with Sterling Shepard, the Joe Shane was able to save more money by keeping him on the roster than outright releasing him. So like when
That
you
was a
talk
money
about
move, wasn't a
right,
man move.
right, it could have been both, but the
Yeah,
only thing we know for certain is the Giants saved more money than just outright releasing Sterling Shepard and then having to sign someone in his place as well that would have cost against the cap. So really, there's a lot of uncertainty behind Shepard. You said we don't know coming off his injury whether he's going to be ready for week 1. I'm glad that he is back in the room, but that is certainly a question mark with how much he's going to be able to contribute.
sure.
The Kenny Golladay piece is fascinating to me because we both were very lukewarm on the signing originally. There were other guys that got $8 to $10 million in the open market that we thought, hey, maybe it could get similar production to Kenny Golladay.
Yep.
So we were not very high to begin with. He had a disastrous year 1 with the Giants. There's no other way around it. But Adam, I feel like the pendulum has swung completely in the other direction on Kenny Golladay now, where people are basically saying, what are we going to get from him? Can he give us 500 yards? Like, this is a guy that can get you 1,000 yards and 8 or 9 touchdowns in a season. And I expect, while we weren't high on him a year and a half ago, I expect him to perform much better than he did last year. So I think you have at least a competent 1A type of receiver. Like you said, I don't know if he's a pure number 1, but he at least fills a skill set in this wide receiver room that, if healthy, I think the Giants can rely on. Now,
if, am I right, friends? You can move on to the next topic here, but I will just say, right, the guy combined for almost 1,000 yards over the last 2 years from the Lions and then over to the New York Football Giants. So it's just, again, it's all great on paper, but you got to show the production on the field.
I couldn't agree more. And because of those question marks, the Giants have loaded up with wide receivers across this roster, from guys that were on the roster last year, guys that were drafted, guys that are on the practice squad, guys that are undrafted free agents. Adam, I have a list. I don't even know if it's fully exhaustive because there's still names that are coming out back and forth. But if I ask you how many of wide receivers are in the mix to like in the Giants building competing for a roster spot, how many would you say?
I'm using the same tab we used yesterday talking about the secondary. Laundry list of names. Man, you know what's funny? I didn't think this out ahead of time of like how many bodies would I say. 16.
So right now I have 15 different names, which it could be
Come
16.
on, not too shabby.
There might be mini camp invites. I know that there are a couple, so there could be 16 or even 17 names that are coming out. So, I mean, this just speaks to the uncertainty of what the Giants room is going to be. Is Darius Slayton going to be here? Is Sterling Shepard healthy week 1? What can we rely on Kadarius Toney? Is Kenny Golladay back, et cetera, et cetera? Adam, I'm not going to bore everyone and just read every single name off because you've already mentioned a lot of the top guys that are already going to be here, including Wandale Robinson. After that, we go into guys like Richie James, Robert Foster, CJ Board. Did you forget about Colin Johnson? Did you remember David Sills? What about Alex Bachman? There's also a guy named Travis Toivonen. which I didn't even know that the Giants had.
Pronounced to perfection.
Yeah, exactly. Austin
David
Proehl
Sills still on this team.
Right. Austin Proehl is another guy that's kind of in the practice squad situation. And then you have the two undrafted free agents in Dalen Baldwin and Andre Miller. That is 15 guys. And when you think about it, it's like
Pearson out of Mississippi.
See, there you go. There's your 16th. It's like you almost even knew, Adam. You just wanted to get to 16. Let me tell you that. But this just speaks to the uncertainty of the room, where if I said to you, how many of those players are a absolute deadbolt lock to be on the Giants week 1? How many guys would you say?
Oh God, I mean, it's an even greater question here. Let's round out that question. Let's leave that as a cliffhanger here as we address something. You mentioned some of the names here in the undrafted free agent class. A lot of names on this roster here, and then that's what we'll close out on. How many of these guys are locks to be making the opening day roster? The interesting thing is, unlike a lot of the other prospects we talked about in the draft, we like Wan'Dale Robinson, but any of these positions, there's undrafted guys that we really like, tight ends that we talked about, right? And Austin Allen. There are players, defensive tackle in Truesdale, that we think can come in here and have a role for this team that the Giants really stole after the draft concluded. Some fans seem to be really excited about guys on the list of undrafted free agents at the wide receiver position. The two that come to mind are Andre Miller, obviously out of Maine, and then you also had the other wide receiver, Dalen Baldwin, out of Michigan. Here's the thing, man, and I think you're going to talk a little bit. Let's go with Andre Miller, because this is the big name on the topic. I watched a little bit of tape of him. It looks pretty good. You know, there's some things to like there, if you want to frame it that way. I don't necessarily get the hype that some people seem to be bringing around him. What do you see or have heard that should either get fans excited or maybe kind of temper this expectation that he's one of these guys that's going to come in and storm the Giants off of this undrafted pile?
Yeah, listen, nothing against Andre Miller, but I just listed 15 guys that are going to be in this room, and it'll be curious to see if Andre Miller can separate himself. I will talk about the good. I'll talk about the question marks here. Andre Miller is a big body guy, 6'3", 210 pounds, I think 215. He's a big body wide receiver. He had 7 games of over 100 yards receiving in the CAA, right? He had a relative athletic score of 9.6 out of 10. Like, he is a very good athlete for his size. And so that's what's tantalizing about him. Here's my challenge with this. He did play for the University of Maine, where he's playing in the CAA conference. I don't necessarily know if there's that many other guys that are NFL type talents that he's going up against. So just having a bigger body and bigger athleticism may help him. The other thing is, I think his best game was in the CAA or the college football final, where he had 126 yards and a touchdown. That was 2018, Adam. So we're talking 3.5-4 years removed from where I think was his peak performance. Listen, he's a guy that can come in. I know Giants fans are excited. It's a shiny new toy. It's a big, tall, athletic receiver, and we all love them. But when I talk about the other 14 or 15 guys that are in front of him, even guys like David Sills and Alex Bachman, have been training, been in camp, have caught passes in an NFL game. You got to think that they have a further leg up to make this roster than Andre Miller at this point.
Yeah, and it's a small school piece that kind of rubs me. Not the I don't say I'm rubs it the wrong way, but I just don't see it, I guess, is my point. I know that he's big, and nobody loves a big receiver more than me. I just didn't get the hype around it. A lot of people have called for him, and maybe I'll be wrong. Let's see what he looks like when he gets into camp. Maybe he has an opportunity to be more competitive and steal some of, some clout from some of these other guys. Like you said, there's names that are there. The Giants brought back CJ Board. Does that mean that he doesn't get shuffled across the deck here, and all of a sudden practice squad spots back into the roster spots are opened up and someone can climb over it? Fantastic. But do you have a little bit deeper on him before? Because I want to touch on the Michigan product as well here, who, again, I guess in theory should get some people excited, but there's a reason why we are kind of downplaying not only the prospects. To your point, we're not poo-pooing the prospects as much as we're saying, look at this room, as open as it is. There are some key players we're going to touch on to close this out that tell you why it may be a little more defined than we realize.
Yeah, the last thing I'll say about Andre Miller, I love the way that he interviews and he talks about himself. They asked him who he models his game after. He said he believes he's more of a Michael Thomas type receiver, where he's like a big body possession guy. Pretty good guy to put yourself against. The guy that led the NFL in receptions.
as the kind of the Bob Costas of podcasting interview spaces. Just, if people are asking, I'm just putting names out there.
If I'm comparing myself, I'm probably to the guy that led the league in receptions multiple years in a row. Like, that's kind of the guy that I think I am. He says growing up, his idol was Terrell Owens, so another big body type receiver. And it's interesting when they ask him, when people ask about your game, what would you say? And he said, I wouldn't say anything. Just give them the film, let them watch the film, and they can make their decision. So he's got that cockiness and that arrogance that you kind of want from a wide receiver. But again, there are so many different guys in this wide receiver room. It's tough to tell where Andre Miller would be, but I have no problem bringing him in, throwing him into the mix, and seeing if he could snake one of those last roster spots or a practice squad spot.
Yeah, again, in all of this, I want him on the practice squad. I think when you come out of a school like Maine, be on the practice squad for a year. It doesn't mean a year from now, I'm not talking about you in a very different light if you start to get some reps and develop inside of the system. We have a system now. The other quick player that I just wanted to touch on was Dalen Baldwin out of Michigan, although he didn't start there. He transferred into there, 6'2", 218. So, big boy, as you say, another big body in the room. Listen, he ran a 4.65 40. You talk about the fact that he's not a burner, but he does do a nice job down the field. Again, I'm only bringing him up to say, and then we're going to get back into the room here for the New York Football Giants. It's like, okay, be in the building, be on the practice squad. Maybe you can steal a spot. There's plenty of names on the practice squad that I'll be happy to have either one of these two players there instead of. But I'm not hyped on these guys in the same way of, hey, watch out, they're coming for a roster spot.
So, Adam, it's interesting because on Dalen Baldwin, and what I realized as I was doing some just like, checking the tape, seeing what they bring to the table, what they did at the combine, so on and so forth, I realized that both Dalen Baldwin and Andre Miller have the same kind of size in terms of, they're more of a big-bodied wide receiver. They're both 6'2", 6'3", 215 to 220 pounds. And what that tells me is Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll and Kafka are looking and saying, okay, we kind of have Kadarius Toney, Wan'Dale Robinson, Sterling Shepard, like slot dynamic players when healthy. Sure. We've got, Darius Slayton on the outside is kind of like a go wide receiver for now. We have Kenny Golladay, who's the big body possession receiver. It's almost like they're saying, we have Kenny Golladay. Let's get some guys that have the same type of frame and can have that big catch radius and are athletic. And let's see if we can develop one of those to be a Kenny Golladay type player for us, because we already have those gadget slot, get him the ball in the backfield type of players on the roster already.
Yeah, you draft a player high because you need more wide receiver talent. And this is what we said about every single thing that Joe Schoen and the Giants have done. Can't fix it all. But what we can do is maybe give ourselves an opportunity this year in the background to quietly bring some players along that we think could have a role. Alex Bachman, I think, is still deserving. Like, you and I still like him. Like, I was disappointed last year when they didn't maybe sacrifice a returner to be able to have him up on the roster just to see. We'll see what happens. It ends up fleshing out there. At the end of the day, we did this in a very specific order because there are questions about the returning players that have been on this roster. Add a talent like Wandale Robinson. There are curiosities around some undrafted free agents and what they could do here. But there's two players that the New York Football Giants brought in underneath the Joe Schoen regime and underneath Brian Daboll and with the Mike Kafka system in mind. The first of which had ties back to the Buffalo Bills under Daboll while he was there, spent his last season in Washington, and that's Robert Foster. We talked about it when we were looking at prospects coming out of the draft class, and you were thinking about a like-for-like replacement for Darius Slayton. Well, guess what? I got a guy who's 6'2", 200 pounds, and ran a 4.4 40 in Robert Foster, and he doesn't have a lot of great stat lines, shy of saying in his rookie year, 2018, 27 catches, 541, 3 touchdowns, did some work after the catch as well, averaged 12.3 yards per target. To me, that's the first body right there that we talk about. It's not a 1 or 1A here. There's two guys here, and I'm really excited about the other one. And by the way, he also came out in that draft class with a 5.4 prospect grade. That's someone that can develop, be at the back end, a contributor. So when you're looking at this roster now and you already know you have your 3 top wide receivers established, Robert Foster can be situationally your 4th wide receiver. I like him. They brought him in for a reason. Like, I think that he has a somewhat guaranteed roster spot right now to fill this out. The other guy, Andy, because I'm almost going to gloss over this, and you're going to give more details and context to Richie James. The only thing I'm going to provide you with, as you just said, smaller guys, fast guys, right? 5'8", 5'9". Here's a product that's 5'10", ran a 4.4 40, and guess what? He came out with a 5.9 prospect grade when he was drafted by the San Francisco 49ers. The stats aren't there, but I think the functionality in the system is for Richie James.
So, okay, you gave me two names, and I agree with you a little bit, and I disagree with you in some parts. I think Robert Foster is an interesting name in that he has familiarity in the system. It feels like he was a name that was brought in to be like, if our offseason plans don't really work out the way that we want, that maybe he's a guy that can at least fill a roster spot, knows the system, can get up to speed quickly. It's like the in case of emergency, pull the Robert Foster lever, right? Like,
let me not say fourth wide receiver, capable of playing a role. Situationally, he can be lined up on the field for X number of possessions, right?
Yes, that's kind of the way that I think about it. Is like in case of emergency, break glass on the Robert Foster situation, and I think that's perfectly fine. That's what smart teams do because you never want to be caught out like the Giants were on their offensive line last year. So I totally get that. On the Richie James piece, I think this is a shift in mentality for the Giants in terms of the kick return, punt return specialist type of role because he does have really good speed. He is 5'9", but he's taking kick returns to the house. He had a 97-yard kick return for a touchdown for the San Francisco 49ers. He has really good speed. He's a really good special teams type player. What I think is interesting is the Joe Judge regime, and maybe Jason Garrett was involved in this too. It was like, just give me a guy that has a floor. Like he doesn't have much of a ceiling. Just give me the floor and I'll work with the floor. And that's a guy like CJ Board, who can do a little bit of everything, will be on special teams, can fill in a pinch as the fifth wide receiver. What the Giants are saying is give me guys with upside. Like I want guys that can take it to the house. I want a guy that I may only call in on three plays, but one of those plays could be a 60-yard touchdown, not a 4-yard out route to make it 3rd and 8. So to me, I think this is a shift in mentality of give me guys that fill specific roles that I ask them to do one or two things, and it can be electric because they're really good at those things. Not just, well, this guy's a Swiss Army knife, so we could just throw him in any situation and hopefully he could be a C- in whatever we do.
Yeah, and this is ultimately where I think when we look back at this wide receiver room, we say Kenny Golladay, Kadarius Toney, and Wan'Dale Robinson. Now, obviously, the wrinkle of is Sterling Shepard capable of being healthy? Then I love having him in the mix. He's a veteran. Everybody gets that. I think the idea of what Darius Slayton can be or what his position can be, that's the one that's up for grabs, not just from the money it means for the Giants, but everybody else in this room. Hey, show me you're worth it. You can go. CJ Board, not a lot of guaranteed money. Richie James, show me you can do it. CJ could be gone, right? David Sills have opportunities. But none of these guys are so bubbled up there at the back end at the 5 or 6 spot here on the roster. But again, I think that most of what you're going to see is what currently exists here fleshing itself out. And then we'll develop something in behind that. Maybe, again, and Alex Bachman could still find his way there. Maybe we're selling a couple of these undrafted free agents short. But I think you want to have some curiosity at positions. I just think that you're a little bit further than closer from saying mixed bag. Yesterday I said secondary, young players, let them figure it out. Wink Martindale, versatility, etc. It's a little bit different on the offensive side when you say, I need you to be here at this spot at this time for the route to work. That hurts, especially. I'll give tip of the hat to you, Andy, before we leave. That's about Daniel Jones. If you're evaluating Daniel Jones, you want reliability and consistency around him. Undrafted free agent wide receivers can be hard ones to pin down and say, we can trust you to be able to gauge where our quarterback is.
At the end of the day, we highlighted the cornerback room and the secondary yesterday. Today, we're talking about the wide receiver room. The perfect correlation is Julian Love and Darius Slayton are both making $2.5 to $3 million. They both had down years and they're kind of replacement level players. If Joe Judge wants to free up $4 or $5 million and he thinks they're bringing in their guys, whether it's Robert Foster or Dane Belton or Yusuf Corker or whomever, the Giants can free up cap space, move on from guys from the previous regime, and start molding this the way that they want.
It's the end of the week here, so I hate to do it. But yeah, if Joe Judge wants to bring in some different players, I applaud the Giants pivoting off of Joe Shane here and giving Joe Judge total control of the franchise.
I can't get him out of my head. I can't get it out of my head, Adam.
It's the bad man's gone, Andy. We're going to be back again. You follow us on YouTube. You get the podcast where we get those needs fulfilled. We said we continue to see great numbers. We appreciate the support. This isn't the end of the discussion around all of these players. There's more to break down in undrafted free agency, more to break down on this roster inside the depth chart. We're going to keep doing it all off season long and updating the situation with James Bradbury and paying all of these fantastic draft picks. But until next time, friends, as Andy Mackiewicz would want, need, and nay, always demand the people and Joe Judge know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.